Just give me a thumbs up when you can see them.
Yes, yes.
Oh, great. Thanks, Keith. Well, look, huge thanks. To be honest, I've had a listening brief, but I came in for Will's and Keith's, and both were fascinating. I feel slightly out of my depth here because I come from a practitioner background, and I'm early career, despite being late age in the whole academic environment. I've been fortunate to have done some fascinating work at master's level at Oxford and Cambridge, but I don't have a career of academia behind me like my two colleagues who've just spoken. So I am somewhat wary of what I'm about to share, and therefore feedback would be fantastic. But essentially, I've got a story to tell, because I recognize that anyone can go to a paper and read the academic research processes that are behind it. But what I would like to do is share some of my passion and some of my insights as a practitioner coming into the academic world. The way I want to do that is by sharing why is this important? How did I go about the research? I'd like to talk about the prototype model that was developed and the methodology, and how the British government has rolled it out for the Environment Agency. And I would like to talk about next steps, what UK is trying to do, and the various mega projects that have trialed the methodology and the model. So first of all, the why. Everyone on this call will realize what the SDGs are about. And I was late to the game. I didn't really fully understand what they're about until 2017. And I'll explain why that date is so important. But I'm going to, through this talk, introduce you to some of the challenges I found of trying to translate sustainable development goals down to a local level. How can you use the power of these SDGs to bring stakeholders together and measure impact in a verifiable way that can be truly attributed to those who are doing it? Through the process, I'm just at the end of my PhD now, and there are 12 papers I've done, and this is one of them, and this will be the primary focus of the talk. But I've set up my own management. I was in the British government and the Foreign Office for 20 years. I then went into consultancy, and I did a lot of pro bono work for the World Wildlife Fund, helping them define impact. And that's what I did for large businesses globally, but particularly in UK. And in 2011, this is just winning the UK's most senior project management award for the impact design work that we did. And that combined with my life as a expedition leader, which is just a hobby, it's not my career. And it was when I skied to the North Pole and I was extracting through a Russian scientist base in February 2017. And the scientists there said that there was 1 million square kilometers less ice in that month based on NASA satellite readings than the previous year. And I thought there was a language barrier. And I was literally blown away. I'd been on this physical, really demanding adventure where the average temperature was -45, and incredible person. Amazon was making a film of an American who is a cancer recoverer who's truly inspiring. But all of us were just massively taken by this fact of the ice melting so fast, and the scientists explaining the impacts to the weather patterns and everything else that's going on. So literally from that moment, I said, when I get back to UK, I want to find out what I can do to be able to, in a small way, make a difference. And in my very small bubble of work within UK, but I also work for the UN and for instance, work for Cisco, a big technology company, designing or writing their program management code of practice. I wanted to say, look, I understand something about delivering major projects, and in Europe, I've been the project director of a couple of UK's largest infrastructure projects. I wanted to see how I could convert that knowledge through research into answering this Sustainable Development Goal question. And very simply put, I wanted to understand more about the SDGs and why they are so important. And I wanted to link it to infrastructure projects, which I knew something about. And I was particularly concerned about how many infrastructure projects are based on business cases that are fundamentally wrong. In other words, they are so economically focused, not balanced against critical social and environmental aspects. And because I happen to be one of the UK government's senior advisors to the Cabinet Office and Treasury, I thought, well, if I can learn more about the environmental side through research, maybe my voice would carry a bit more weight. So that's essentially what I was trying to do. Let me explain 3 problems that I came across. And I'm sorry, Will and Keith, particularly to you, but many others are on this call. You come from such a deep academic credibility side that I'm going to be at quite a high level, but forgive me for that. But I just want to share some of the obvious points that will come out, and then I'll lead into the model that was developed and what these senior executives said. So we know that the SDGs are hugely complex. There's 17 of them. There are 169 targets, 232 indicators, although there are more than that, but there are some overlaps. So the question is they're relevant at global and national level, but how can we make them relevant at organizational and project level, and the big environmental programs, and also start making investments around infrastructure that are better balanced around the triple bottom line. So I started off by trying to do some systems mapping. And so I worked with UK's Sustainability Company of the Year 3 years ago, Anglia Water, which is a big water utility company, to look at how they were measuring SDGs. And they essentially selected 35 of the 169 targets. And I did this network mapping for them to try and link all the benefits and disbenefits from one target to another, just of those 35 targets they'd chosen. And you can see that there are infinite possibilities of the connections for each other. And that leads to the point that you can make a science of this, but there's a lot of art actually. And if it's too complex, people just lose interest. And therefore we have to find a way of simplifying it to make it realistic, to measure something at a project level. So I also wanted to better understand about the size of the potential benefit of infrastructure. We all know in all our regions how critical it is, and you only have to go to the developing world to see how even more important it is there to bring economic, social, and environmental aspects up. But if it's done badly, that huge investment will have such a negative effect. And of course, with climate change awareness increasing now and COP26 on the horizon, this is it. We are starting to get the Greta effect, which is that things can change and must change and will change. And I turned from being a pessimist to an optimist, despite the true horrors of what I saw at the North Pole. So we all know these facts, but I just remind myself how badly UK is doing in this area. You know, and a bunch of OECD countries here, but across those 17 goals 2 years ago, we've got 4 reds, 5 amber reds, and 8 ambers. We've got no greens for UK, but we're just about all reds. If you look from the column of climate change, the global goal number 13, everyone's near enough in red or amber red, and that is where the critical area is. So inevitably, that's where much of my research focused. So how did I do it? You know, to experienced researchers, you'll well know it, but and I've got academic papers behind each of these areas, and the paper I showed earlier is number 3, which was interviews of 40 CEO executives of global construction companies. I led into that from a survey of 325 engineers to get their view. Did they think it was important measuring sustainable development goals? And if so, what did they currently do? Did it match their ambitions? And then I developed this tool, and then I took it into the real world, the practitioner world, to see whether it was useful to them. So I won't dwell on this, but I soon learned that sustainable development and sustainability and SDGs, there's such a different lexicon, and professors who've studied this for many years themselves are still learning. And I, for myself, are such a new guy on the block, but I found it fascinating reading back to all the definitions of this and where we're going, and trying to understand how these three things interact and how well or not understood they are in businesses. And then on the right-hand side, that's my world, project management and infrastructure. And the difference between project and project management is clearly an important definition. So that's started focusing the area. In a simplistic term, the theories that I was looking at and that my models and methodology is based on are ones that you're probably well aware of. And this top one, the theory of change, is so fundamental to every business case that's developed around infrastructure, around understanding this input to impacts. And because of my Marine Commando service beforehand, understanding, and my great hero, Colin Powell and Weinberger doctrine, and understanding the ends, ways and means is critical before you commit anything. And too often, in strategic sense, we do not understand the impact well enough before we commit into this. In this days of environmental criticality, especially around climate change, we so have to understand this and start from the right and then work back. And what I found in UK is the level of knowledge around outcomes and impacts is so very poor. And indeed, that's where my 10 years of pro bono with World Wildlife was trying to help them move from measuring success by outputs into outcomes and impacts. And it's a difficult journey because I admit myself, I find it really, really difficult sometimes to clearly articulate it. You can do it qualitatively, but how do you do it quantitatively in a meaningful way? And because in infrastructure, you build something, people move on to the next one and they rarely measure it afterwards. There are a few exceptions like legacy of Olympic Games and things like that, where they still try and track what meaningful difference has been quantified from the investment in those Olympics. But by and large, we're very poor at doing it. And the other one is very well known to everyone, but economic, society, and environment, the triple bottom line, and the criticality of understanding that around investment decisions right up front. So I won't dwell on this for long, but I was fortunate enough to be sponsored by the Institute of Civil Engineering in UK, and which is a global organization, and they gave me access to their members. So it was a fabulous advantage. So I met with all the CEOs and the heads of sustainability of the organizations that you can see there. And that gave me an insight. And I'm going to go through 4 key findings and the 2 recommendations from it. Firstly, 9 out of 10 of the engineers from the survey were well over on the right of so they were very high of the Likert scale of demanding that this is important and we need to measure it at a project level. But it was challenged by the fact that they did not. So there was 73% of them that said they did not have the tools and approaches to do it adequately at organizational or project level. So a problem there, there's a gap. And the 40 interviews, if I boil it down to one slide, that there's a lot of clever graphics coming out from NVivo. That was the tool that I used, and a lot of quantification of some of those as well, despite being essentially a qualitative study. But these are the main messages that came out, which is the success definition that they recognize it as a problem because they are paid by the client to deliver an output. And when they've completed that hospital or the high-speed rail or the bridge, they then walk away from it. Yeah, they've got their good name to try and win the next proposal, but essentially success definition needs to be longer and everyone needs to buy into that from the start. The next one is business priorities, is that they recognize that Michael Porter's creating shared value isn't very helpful. Many of them didn't know about it, and they saw corporate social responsibility as being, well, we'll make some profit, but we have to make a profit to survive, and we'll give some of that profit back. And they haven't made that step, many of them. And it was a really good discussion I had with them around truly moving into this new world where it's in their interests, both for recruiting smart people from this from a ever decreasing population of smart engineers, but also they in their own long-term sustainable business goals as well. It's in their interest to buy into this. And you can see the other ones there. I don't need to go through them all, but they were too outputs focused. They realized that, and they really bought into this study. I'm not going to dwell on this too much, but essentially what I was trying to look at is at an organizational level, which I'm calling portfolio level, measuring success during a project, which is around the output versus the outcomes and impacts afterwards. And this diagram helped a lot of organizations to be able to separate those apart. And it sounds, and it is a very simplistic diagram, but it really helped them. And a lot of communities have used this on their websites, an adaptation of this diagram that came out from the study. And a simple conceptual diagram is showing you that on the left at a project level, you can see some SDGs. I've just randomly selected some across. You can see on the left-hand side, economic, social, environment, and see whether there is a link through to national and global level. And I did a number of studies with the Global Reporting Initiative. They gave me access to all their data, and a couple of organizations that own global sustainability reporting tools at project level. There's Envision, Lead, and Sequel from the Building Research Establishment, to see whether we can make that link through there. So what was the model? And I will be very quick here to save boring. It would take a lot of time to explain this. So I'm going to jump to a simplified version on the next slide. So on the top, you can see that theory of change that I spoke about. And on the left, running through it, left to right, is the theory of change. And the square in the middle is saying that on the journey, we need to understand when you deliver these, we have to understand the social construct of an organization that is delivering this. And often it's joint ventures and complex supplier relationships, but there's then the project life cycle in the center. Infrastructure is just not about the output, it's about the system of systems. And those on this call will understand what systems of systems mean. But for those who are not used to that phraseology, a hospital is not a hospital on its own. It needs transport networks, it needs communications, it needs an educated and trained staff. Everything needs a system to operate. And when we do our analysis around investments, we need to understand the systems approach to be able to truly understand outcomes and impacts. So if that was the model, the methodology was me working with the Global Compact, and they were every step of the way with me, and that their CEO of UK Europe came to all the workshops through the case studies that I ran with the UK government and the Environment Agency. And we essentially used their compass, the UN SDG compass, and we turned it into the SDG iPro, which also on the left-hand side, you can see it's got 5 steps, but essentially it starts from understanding what the SDGs are about. It's then prioritizing them and selecting a few meaningful targets. And as an example, for our entire UK Environment Agency, that I'll come on to in a moment, that runs everything across UK flooding and is the government agency to do it, I got them to limit it to just 4 targets that they measure against to make it meaningful and verifiable and not run before you can walk. And that's where they are now. And they're going to adopt this approach and model for their entire portfolio from the 1st of April. So the impact, let me quickly come on to a bit more about the Environment Agency and what we did. I set up a project called MESI, Measuring Infrastructure SDG Impact, with a bunch of academic partners, the UK government, the Global Compact, but the two main ones were Environment Agency and Tideway. Tideway, because it's a mega project in itself, building a super sewer under London at £4.9 billion. And the Environment Agency, because their budget is many, many billions, but they run a mass of projects, 500 projects, and they're all different sizes. And it's whether this could be scaled from project to portfolio. So just a couple of activities I work with them. I mentioned the methodology. There are 5 steps. This is activity 2 within step 2. And it's just giving a sense is that I went out with the Environment Agency leaders and worked with their project teams to trial this model and methodology, because a busy engineer is going to be the first person to tell you saying, this does not add value to me. I've already got a ton of things to do. I'm told I have to measure everything from time, cost, quality, to organizational issues, to travel, to this, to that, the other, and you're adding something else. And that they are a very good test of whether this is going to be useful to them going forward. And we had some really, really honest discussions, quite painful for me at times, but we adapted it to something that is hugely appreciated by them now. And that's very rewarding for a beginner researcher like myself. This is activity 4, which is where you start blending the measurement into existing benefits management and other measurement that they've got ongoing anyway. It's not a simple task. When I started working with their larger projects, the ones that are over £500 million, they've got this massive measurement they do. And what I had to do was see how I could work with what they're already measuring to link it to SDG targets, rather than put SDG targets in the center of everything they do and tell them to rework everything, which just isn't going to work. So the second example, and I've only got a couple of minutes left now, is around London's super sewer called Tideway. And they were really interested in this because although I came to them with this model and methodology halfway through delivery, they wanted to see what they would have done differently at the start if they'd had it available. And they were a fantastic team to work with because they were very innovative in the way they were going about their business. And frankly, I think they taught me much more than I ever shared of value to them. I'm going to share a couple of graphics that went into their annual report a couple of months ago, coming out from this 4 months case study we had. But one of the things in my methodology I do with them is taking them into understanding what their project is about and how it relates to SDGs, and then start getting some prioritization, some scale around which ones are more important. And it was fascinating to find out that they now had a language, a global language to use to be able to define the infrastructure investment around education, health impacts, around climate change impacts. This was a revelation to them, that they were using different language and they really liked the visuals that the SDGs provided. And they thought this could have been really helpful at the start, bringing stakeholders together. You know, there's some maps like this that they already had sustainability targets, 64 of them. And there are a lot of quantitative analysis behind this that provided these graphics that I developed with them to show how they fed into some of these icons. But we wanted to get beyond just greenwash great graphics, which often companies do, our global leaders do, because they haven't got the real detail, verifiable detail behind it. So that's what we were putting in place for them to move forward. This is post running the case study. Here's one from the Environment Agency. This is writing up the case study I'd run from the research. and no need to read them all, but we will be able to embed the knowledge that was generated by this project to support the measurement of SDG performance across our new portfolio of Environment Agency from the 1st of April, totaling 5.2 billion, including around 50 major projects in excess of 50 million. And you know, that there were many others who were closely involved in this work that were very, very resistant to the belief that you could use at project level targets that could be linked through to a global level. And so that was very reassuring. And the very last slide I've got is just to say, okay, so how might this be used in future? And I was fascinated by both Will's and Keith's work, you know, deep technology. I've been talking to some of the geospatial teams in UK because of I saw the impact it was having, the positive impact it was having, for instance, in measuring in East Africa, the deforestation that was going on, and even the fishery work that was going on. But we were having real challenges to be able to build this investment outcome impact understanding from the start of a project, and then measuring it and explaining it at the end, despite these amazing use of satellite imagery, etc. And so if I just explain this, the left-hand side of this slide, which is where this work has by far the most value, is at the investment stage. And the green sort of, the arrows in the center running from left to right, those are essentially saying the pre-investment stage, the business case development stage, the deliver and the long-term impact. At the very bottom is UK government's standard gateway process for making these investment decisions. And working with the Cabinet Office in UK and Treasury, this is what we're moving forward with. So you can see on the left-hand side is around, you can see these above the left-hand chevron is MISI to inform the choice of project, MISI to widen discussion on benefits and disbenefits, MISI, the IVC is this impact value chain that is the model that I briefly described earlier, and the SDG Pro is the methodology to embed in options appraisal. I'm sorry, I've spoken far too fast, and I wish, you know, that in some places I could have gone much deeper into the detail that lies behind it. But in a way, this is why I've turned from a pessimist to an optimist, because I've gone on a journey where I've learned a bit more about it, but the practitioner world are really waking up to the power of the investment decisions. And then when I listened to Will and Keith just prior to me around the amazing harnessing of technology, around the ability to use that to start making a difference, you start aligning that to the investment decisions at the start and then seeing it through a project. And I get much more optimistic about messaging coming out from COP26. So let me leave it there, and it's probably time to hand over to the next speaker. But Praveen, thank you to you for chairing this and hosting the event.
Thank you, Dr. Paul. That was a very wonderful presentation, and you have a very diverse career. And maybe next time, maybe in physical conference, you can present a keynote speech there where you can have a lot of time, 40 minutes time and all. So that will be very fine to you for your research work because of your diverse career. And I'll leave some time here. If anyone have any questions or comments, you can please go ahead and ask Dr. Paul.
I've got to thanks, Paul, for the presentation. I got what I hope is kind of a quick question or quick comment. I think, you know, the work you're doing here is tackling one of the most difficult and one of the most kind of regressive areas of change. I'm really excited by the findings you've got here, because one of the things that I found when I started traveling internationally to talk about the need for different metrics, different ways really to conceptualize change and valuation. One of the most striking things that I think I'm seeing in your presentation is that you've actually got very quickly, you've got a whole set of metrics that people seem to be willing, people in the investment arena seem to be willing to adopt. And I'm just wondering if you can talk a little bit more about that. I mean, you must have felt going in there that, I mean, you know this better than I do, but that you're kind of going into the lion's den for attempting to shift the perception of what's valuable or what's valued. But it seems like the metrics that you're designing here are giving you, as you said at one point, a shared language with which to work in order to shift the approach to what an investment is. A lot of those costs are externalized, right, in the current thinking of an investment. But it seems like you've been rapidly able to shift the perception of what value is. Can you talk a little bit maybe about that? I mean, really hopeful here. Thanks for the information about this.
Well, I particularly stand on the shoulders of giants because I'm too late in life to be able to develop my own sort of conclusion. But Michael Porter, of course, and value, understanding value chain is critically enabling to be able to make sense of, well, investment, and it leads through this linear approach to deliver something out here. That's very, very important. But in terms of valuation and creating change at what I call the Greta speed, we know that green finance and the finance community are part of that and dramatically changing things. My brother, who's a fund manager, chief operating officer in the London finance sector, 3 years ago, he was saying, Paul, no, this green side, it's frankly, is not important to us. They have completely changed their tune. And it's because of the power of the finance network. So that's one good side. And that is like a major rock being thrown in the pool and the waves coming out and affecting everyone. And you're not part of it. And ESG is becoming much better understood, and the green stocks are building up. And we're seeing our oil and gas industry leaders standing up and saying, right, we are going to take on net zero. We are going to balance that. And yes, we've got to see the reality of that. Where I found brilliant collaborators like the Inter-America Development Bank and the World Bank are so far down this road in terms of the investment decisions. You would have come across them around the world, Will, and they've got such bright people working on it. And where I've shared ideas with them, for instance, specifically around investments on infrastructure, where we found we work particularly well together is that they're doing it at a national level, and I was trying to do it at a business project level, and we were able to share each other's ideas to be able to build these criteria lists, which are just a starting point. But the word you used, now I'll finish on this, which is, apart from what's happening at a national global green finance COP26 level, there's also this change of the head and hearts of people who are on the ground making this happen. And I haven't been out on the ground with the World Wildlife Fund for 5 years now, and I wonder how easy it is to take this language and be able to make things happen when we all know it's such a tough challenge to be able to get skilled staff locally to be able to deliver projects anyway. And if you I don't know whether this methodology will work there. So UNOPS and the World Wildlife Fund, I hope, are going to help trial it when we go out there. So I'm sorry, that's a long-winded answer, but I think this valuation thing is at a global finance sector aspect, but it's also down at the local. And I finished on that heads and hearts of local teams. And I don't know how well my methodology is going to work there. It works well in the UK methodology with highly skilled, trained, people, but how do we make that work in Tanzania in a fisheries environmental program, as an example?
Thank you, Dr. Paul. So, yeah, that concludes. Yeah, Professor.
Let me ask a quick question.
Yeah, sure, Professor.
Oh, Paul, I enjoyed your presentation, but I missed one point which is important for me. You mentioned the SDG priorities. My question is, who defines, in your approach or your view, these priorities?
So let me give a simple example from the Environment Agency in UK. What we found is that they did not want to stipulate every single target that a project had to manage and measure. And there are also the principle, don't give them too many because they'll drown in data collection, and don't completely straitjacket to them. So the compromise, the prioritization is that at an organizational level, the executive and senior managers align a few goals and targets with their strategy. And then what they do at a portfolio level, they then cascade it down to a project and decide, depending on its size, they may say, look, there are 4 mandatory targets you have to measure here, but you have the option of choosing these other 7. And then what that allows is that then you can start collecting data and compare it across the organization to see where people are doing well and badly. Just one of those targets, for instance, is around carbon capture. And all of us on this call will know what a complex subject that is. So even to do one target well, like carbon capture, takes a huge amount of education and sensible application of systems and tools and approaches to get it right. Werner, does that answer your question?
Yeah, sure. It's just, so your view is on the strategic level of the company. And for me, we did a different approach, which I mentioned earlier today, where we see the stakeholder constraints, who give the priority weights to the different targets. But I did send you my coordinates, so we can continue this.
Brilliant. Thanks, Werner.
Thank you.